All right, 1, 2, 3. This is my Bible. It is Yah's word. It is the inspired and infallible word of Yah. It is a lamp unto my feet. Blessed are those who hear the word of Yah and keep it. I find out who I am in the pages contained herein. This is my Bible. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you all today? It's good. Glad to hear. Today's message is titled Separation of Church and State. Now, I don't know if I'll be before you long or not. We'll see. I don't label this under controversial messages, but if you ain't being controversial, are you really saying anything? Now, I know that whenever we hear the term separation of church and state, some people will talk about prayer being taken out of schools. That's sort of the first origin of that, of separation of church and state, when someone said they don't want prayer being led in schools. But the thing is, because a lot of times, the American church, we get really bent out of shape about that. We'll mention that all the time. They took prayer out of schools. But your kids can still pray in school. There is no rule or law or anything against your child praying in school. It just can't be led by a teacher or school faculty. But they will not round your kids up and put them on the firing line if they are found praying in school. And then when you really think about it, and really get down to the lowest common denominator, the schools our children go to, would you want the faculty or teachers there leading them in prayer? Got quiet there. There are people here. Now, I went to Catholic school for 2 years. Not the best place to rely on your children to receive their biblical foundation, because that's our job as parents, correct? I think everyone in here is at least a parent, let alone a grandparent. But that is our job, not for them to learn about how Mary was the mother of God, again, being a person that was in Catholic school. I sent my children to private school for years. One day, they came home singing a secular song. And I asked where they knew the song, because it wasn't an innocent pop song. It wasn't a song that would be on a movie. It was a very suggestive song. Now, I thought they were going to tell me their aunt taught them that song. So I was going to call her and yell at her and say, don't be playing the radio, these songs with my kids in the car. But my children told me no. It wasn't Aunt Kirker. We learned it in gym class. This is a school I'm paying thousands of dollars for my children to attend. I had them at a Christian daycare, and one of the faculty members kept asking me why I don't teach my kids about Santa. And I said, because Santa didn't buy them gifts, I did. I'm working for that. I want the praise. I don't want Santa getting no praise. But there should be a separation of church and state. And I know, again, that goes against our American church philosophies of, no, we need to incorporate both of them. But there's not an example of that working positively, which we will learn today. We're going to learn you something today. Because one of the most populated country, the most populated country in the world, China, they do not have separation of church and state. They have government-sponsored religion. If you want to be a Christian in China, you have to subscribe to one of the 3 government-approved denominations. If you aren't one of those 3 approved denominations, then you are a criminal. You can face jail time for not subscribing to their government-sponsored religion. We know this firsthand due to our friend, Pastor Wadahara. So imagine if America did that here. They only have 3 approved denominations: Catholic, Christian Reform, and Southern Baptist. See, Foursquare wasn't mentioned there. Pentecostal wasn't mentioned there. So what are you going to do? Would you convert? Because if not, you're a criminal. And you have to have church in silent. Some of us can't have church when it's hot outside, or when it's cold outside, or when it's raining, or when it's snowing, or just cause I went out last night. We can't even handle regular first world problem hurdles, let alone if it was against the law. Got quiet here again. You would have to have church in secret if you did not subscribe to one of the 3 government-approved denominations. Now, we will talk on that later. Because governments are all about regulation, are they not? They regulate our food, they regulate the TV, they regulate the movies, they regulate everything. Everything has to get a government stamp of approval, right? I don't want my foundation spiritually, or my children's foundation spiritually, being sponsored by the government. The same government that instituted sundown towns, the same government that instituted slavery, the same government that instituted studies at Tuskegee, or the same government that instituted Jim Crow laws, I definitely do not want my biblical foundation coming from them. If you don't know any of those references, I suggest you Google it. You will be appalled by this nation of things that they approved.
Yeah, that's all right.
But I'm going to show you the problem of the church and state debate. And we're going to look and learn something very, very vital and important that I guarantee you majority of us in here did not learn or did not know. So, we got to back up. 20 years after our Messiah ascends to heaven, he's been crucified on the tree, he's risen from the dead, he's appeared for weeks, and then goes to heaven. So 20 years after that, Emperor Nero takes the throne. Emperor Nero is a crazy man. And this isn't in my notes. And I was like, oh, I'll remember later, but I won't. I know myself. Emperor Nero is so crazy and so insane that when they get the term, the mark of the beast, and that number 666, it's actually code name for Emperor Nero's full name. Because in the alphabet, each letter represents a number. And again, it was translated incorrectly. It really should be 616. They were like, this dude is so crazy. He's the mark of the beast. It's going to be like this at the end. The way that we are being persecuted. We're going to talk about that persecution, and you'll see it lines up with things that we've read about in the study in the book of Revelation, but stuff that they were going through then under this crazy man. So Emperor Nero, he fancies himself a man of music and a man of the arts. What does that sound like? Sounds like something Pastor Darren was preaching on. Because Paul said our battle is against spirits that influence the arts and music. And Emperor Nero said, I'm Mr. Arts and Music. This is Nero's area of expertise. So in mid-July of AD 64, a great fire swept through Rome, beginning among the retail stores around the Circus Maximus, destroying homes and temples. For almost a week, it consumed many old structures of the city. The consensus of Roman historians claim that Nero was responsible for setting the fire in order to use the clear areas to build his own golden house and other new buildings. It was sort of an urban renewal by fire. He started the fire, but then he blamed, quote unquote, Christians for it. We can see this in modern day political fields. When the city of Detroit burned in the late 60s, their properties were bought up at discounted prices and given to people that did not represent the community any longer. This happened all across the nation. That's why you see the people that live in the inner city don't own those businesses because they were burned up in the riots that were started by the people in power. They tell us that it was people burning up their own neighborhoods. Politician Rahm Emanuel once stated, never let a crisis go to waste. Always find a way to get what you want out of it. We can look at what politicians did during the COVID times. They all lined their pockets. Every last one of them. And then they're like, nope, no debt. You still got to pay those student loans, even though we got paid and got our debts forgiven. That's another sermon.
Okay.
Remember the riots that happened during COVID after George Floyd was murdered? And the buildings being broken and damaged and burned? And the news, there's actual footage of off-duty police officers breaking the windows and inflaming the protest. The people that went for peaceful protesting, the agents of the government, started all those. You only need a little light a match, and the whole thing will blow up. One time I took my parents to see this movie called Detroit about the riots in '67, and my dad said, I don't need to watch the movie, I was there. I lived it. There was so much combustion that the smallest match can start it all off. On January 6th, there is video evidence of police officers letting those crazy people into the Capitol building. They were not in there, and then they were like, let's move the gates, come on in. Because again, just like Emperor Nero, you start a problem, then you can blame it on somebody else, even though you were the one that started it. Okay. Nero was no different than our modern day politicians. He blamed the fire on this new group of Hebrew followers. Somebody say Hebrew followers. Because they didn't refer to themselves as Christians. That's not a term that they had. They referred to themselves as the way, followers of the way. We're going to go to Acts chapter 9, verse 1 through 2. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against Yah's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Now, it says there in verse 2 that he was going to take them to prison, but what does it say that he was doing in verse 1? He's murderous threats, which means they might not have all made it to prison. He might have had him stoned like Stephen was. But these followers, these Hebrew followers of Christ, would be mocked, and they would be called little Christs. As they were being killed, why don't you have Christ save you? You're one of his people. He then, Emperor Nero, persecutes these Hebrew Christ followers to no end. Numerous men were thrown in jail. They were tortured. They were burned alive on the street to light the street at night. They were the street lights. Due to this persecution, these followers who called themselves the way would hide and meet in secret. Somebody say secret. I'm not trying to be one of those pastors. I know people hate when people do that. But when I do it, it's to make sure these are things I want you to remember. Okay?
Okay.
The persecution started in Rome, the city, but went through all the provinces that were under Rome's oppression. So Rome is not just in Italy. Rome is all throughout, correct? Like in Jerusalem, they're under Rome's oppression. They're under Rome's government. So they're being oppressed all the places that Rome occupies. And at the time, they were the biggest controlling nation in the world, in the known world. Peter and Paul, the two fathers of the New Testament, they would end up being those that were murdered by the government-sanctioned execution of these fanatic Hebrews. So Emperor Nero is responsible for the murder of Paul and the murder of Peter. You guys following me? I haven't lost anybody yet? All right. Not saying that to be condescending. Say it to make sure we're on the same page, because it won't make sense if I lost you already. So Rome, they have, just like China, who has government-sponsored denominations, Rome allows the Hebrews to have their temples to placate them. They allow them to have their synagogues to keep them in line. Like, you can have that, but you're giving up all of this. Don't let none of that Messiah talk either. But these new followers of Christ are different than those Jews that have their temples. Let's learn something. Because they would preach, Paul and Peter, they would preach to the Jews at the synagogues, but it would end disastrous a lot of times. Let's learn something. We're going to look at the church, quote unquote, the church in Thessalonica. Because Paul wrote them letters, right? And 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, right? So let's learn about them first in Acts chapter 17, 1 through 5. When Paul and his companions had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica. There was a Hebrew synagogue. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them. So when you're reasoning with somebody, you're usually on opposite sides, right? So the people at the synagogue are on one side, Paul is on another side. He's trying to reason, like, you guys need to come over here. You're doing this in this government-sponsored temple. I need you to come out of there. Come out of her, my people, right? He reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah. Now, this is the same person that was breathing out murderous threats on the people that said the same thing. Verse 4. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women. Now, that's the part everybody glosses over, is the women in Paul's ministry. There's numerous of them. It really started to mess up the entire social structure. Again, this isn't in my notes, but Paul, who more reasonably was a widower, said, well, just be celibate. If you can be like me, be celibate. So these women were like, yeah, be celibate. How do you think their husbands felt about that? They was like, yeah, no, get back in here. But they took out a lot of those things because it messed up the social norms that were happening, because so many women were stopping with the patriarchal, not trying to be one of those people, the patriarchy down, not saying that. But I'm just saying a fact of what happened. So many women started to follow what he was saying that it messed up the social norms. Verse 5. But other Jews were jealous. So they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city. So they preached to the Jews that were scattered in that area. So in this verse, and now in Acts chapter 17, they're in Thessalonica preaching to who? Hebrews. Not Thessalonians, not Greeks, not Romans. He's preaching to the Hebrews that are in that city. Did we see that there? Got a couple of answers? All right. Because again, your scriptures are always about the Hebrew people, right? Now, I'm not being exclusionary, heaven forbid, because other nations can tap in if they choose to. But the message is for a specific group, but anybody can come in. Didn't lose anybody, right, did I? Okay, because it says it right there. Those people of other nations choose the Most High and he accepts them. But the Most High did not choose them. Now, this shouldn't be controversial. Again, all throughout Scripture. Hebrew. All about the Hebrews. Oh, you want to come in? Come on in. It's fine. We have enough to go around. So these Hebrews like the message, and this starts the quote-unquote church in Thessalonica. But some people did not like it. And I will explain later why I keep saying quote-unquote church. That might blow your mind. But then trouble ensues and a riot occurs, right? In verse 5. And we're having some Bible studies today. Let's keep going, see what happens next. Jumping down to verse 10. As soon as it was night, the believers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. On arriving there, they went to a Hebrew synagogue. Now the Berean Jews were more noble character than those in Thessalonica. For they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. As a result, many of them believed, as did also a number of prominent Greek women and men and many Greek men. So he's using scriptures. Now I know everybody loves to use Paul as a reason not to follow any previous scriptures. So because what scriptures is he using? The Gospels aren't written yet. What is he using? The Old Testament. Now you're not going to read that's done away with. This is after Jesus died. Verse 13. But then the Jews in Thessalonica learned that Paul was preaching the word of Yah at Berea. Some of them went there too, agitating the crowds and stirring them up. So in Thessalonica, they didn't like Paul in the synagogue, right? Now, that's when he first meets them, and then he later writes them a letter. They can't build a new building to have a church and these new believers, these little Christians, these little Christ, because they were being hunted down. So how is he writing a letter to a church that doesn't exist? It's going to come together. It's going to come together. Let's look at another quote-unquote church. The church in Philippi. Now, Paul would usually go down and speak at the synagogues in the cities, right? Because it says that was his custom. He would go and speak at the Hebrew synagogues, right? Everywhere he would go, that's what he would do. But in Philippi, there is no synagogue. Let's go back to Acts chapter 16, verse 12. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia. And we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. Now, who did he speak with there? The women. Where was the men at? They was sleeping one off. They didn't feel like getting out today. Because this is church time, quote unquote. This would be time they would be going to worship. There is no building to go worship here in Philippi. And then again, heavy concentration of women. So he goes to the river where these Hebrews would worship on the Sabbath. Because there is no building. And here we get the first recorded conversion of someone that's not of Hebrew descent. It's this woman that's there. Let's go to verse 14. One of those listening was a woman of the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of Yah. Yah opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Master, come and stay at my house, and she persuaded us. Now, this is a non-Hebrew accepting this new way, right? And she says, come back to my crib. This is a key aspect here. Lydia is a wealthy woman. She has money. And she says, come back to my house. That's where we're going to meet at. And she said, y'all can come be at my house and be off of the street. Next in this story, Paul and Silas get locked up after the whole situation with the slave girl following them around, because it's not a welcoming place for these little Christs, is it? We understand that? So definitely, because they didn't have a synagogue, so they definitely don't got no church building, do they? Because they're under persecution, right? So how can they have a church for Paul to write a letter to? Let's keep learning. Galatians 1. Nope, never mind. Not yet. Galatians 1 verse 2, Paul wrote to plural, quote unquote, churches in the city of Galatia. He said to the churches in Galatia. Surely this city and oppressed land were not able to build multiple buildings, were they? Because the followers of the way were being persecuted by the current government. Yet Galatia is bold enough to have multiple church buildings? Let's get another clue or two before I crack the case, okay? I'm going somewhere. You know I always do. I never leave you hanging. When Paul wrote to the church of Corinth, he told them about taking up a collection. Now, the conversation of tithes and offering becomes a huge issue in the American church today. People bring up all people that don't want to have tithes and offering in the church. They'll bring up all the Bible verses where the tithe wasn't actually money. They'll bring up all the verses where tithe is food or resources, but they'll ignore all the verses where the tithe is money. They won't bring any of those up. They'll bring up just those. Because when we talk about shall a man rob Yah, that was because in that scenario, in that verse, it was talking about resources and food. But you ignore all the other verses where people are donating money to a building. But I'm going to address this quote-unquote church thing I keep hinting at because this is important. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Now, about the collection for the master's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. Again, plural. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Paul tells them to collect money in Corinth the same way he told them to do in Galatia. Let's grab some more information so we can get to the conclusion of this, okay? First Corinthians 16, 19. To the churches, again plural, in the province of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the master, and so does the church that meets at their house. So does the church that meets at their house. He again says plural churches. So Paul says that people here gather in the home of Aquila and Priscilla for quote-unquote church meetings. Caught that? Let's look at another. 2 Timothy 4:19. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, those people again, and the household of Onesiphorus. It's a cool name. Now, Onesiphorus is a wealthy man. His name literally means bring forth money. It literally means I'm the profitable one. Some people even theorize that this was a nickname given to this man because of his wealth and because of his way to raise money and attain money. To put in today's terms, what Oni would do, shortening his name up, what Oni would do when Paul was in prison, he would go put money on Paul's books so Paul can get commissary. Again, using today's colloquialisms. He was so wealthy and so important that nobody seemed to care in the oppressive government when he would come and visit Paul. He must have been that important to the community that they were like, well, we don't like Paul, we don't like his friends, but Oni's built different. We have seen Priscilla and Aquila's name mentioned a few times. And I just told you that Oni is a wealthy man. Now, if he's cool with Priscilla and Aquila, you think he's slumming it when he's with them? Because not a lot of wealthy people hang out with bums, do they? They usually hang out with like-minded people. They hang out with other wealthy people. Priscilla and Aquila, they were wealthy as well because they had homes in Corinth, Ephesus, and Rome. All over the place, different area codes. Priscilla and Aquila had a franchise tent-making business. So we have a lot of rich people mentioned here. But I really want us to learn this thing so that we can understand what is being talked about. So now we have to learn a vocabulary word so this all ties together. Because we have rich people, now we got to figure out a word. Because Paul was not writing to physical buildings while he was in prison. He wasn't writing to Living Word on 84th Street in Byron Center. That's not what he was doing. There was no church building in Ephesus or Corinth or any other place that he was writing. Remember, during this time period, quote unquote Christians were being targeted and killed. So why would they have these big buildings promoting where they're meeting here? Again, I mentioned Pastor Wadada, who has a church in secret in China. They don't meet in buildings that you know it's church. They have to meet underground. They have to meet in other buildings that don't have like the church of such and such on it. So, vocab word for the day. Because the word we see for church in the New Testament is not the word we use for church today. The Greek word that is used when we see the word church is the word ecclesia or ecclesia, depending on what side of the river you're on. The word means the called out ones, or means the chosen ones. I have chosen you. The Greek word origin of that word was reserved for important high-ranking officials that would meet to discuss laws and other important aspects. So when Paul says to the church in Ephesus, he's saying to the chosen people that reside in Ephesus. There is no brick and mortar building that we look at church today. It is to a group of people, to a chosen group of people in Ephesus that I met. We were staying at that rich person's house. Paul wants them to provide money to the wealthy people because these chosen people are meeting in their house. So that everybody puts their money in the pot together, everybody can be helped out by it. So we don't put a burden just on Aquila and Priscilla. We don't put a burden just on Oni. We can all help out. He wants them to pool their resources together so everybody can share the load. Because a lot of these people are on the run, or they're on the list, like the list Paul had on his way to Damascus. So they are staying at these large houses meeting in secret while getting letters from their friend that's locked up. Because these people, these chosen people, left the government-approved synagogue, and they are now meeting in secret and trying not to be executed or jailed or lit on fire to light the night or thrown in the circus to be mauled by lions. So how do we go in the country of Rome, in the kingdom of Rome, the empire of Rome? How do we go from burning people alive to state-sponsored religion of Rome? I'm so glad you asked. So 3 centuries later, after crazy Nero, and then emperors that followed in his footsteps. Now, mind you, so many of the Hebrews that have either been exiled into the Middle East or Western Africa, or they have assimilated 100% into the European culture. So 3 centuries later, an emperor comes into power. And this emperor, I have the vocabulary word, how to spell it, ecclesia right there. We get Emperor Constantine. Now Constantine grew up a pagan, but later became sympathetic to the Christian faith based off of children's stories. That is how he discovered the faith. And now in the Roman Catholic Church, they call it the Catechism. He was converted the year 312, and then in the year 313, he passed the law which declared tolerance for Christians. Meaning, previously, we weren't tolerant of Christians. Everything that they did, we blamed it on them. We're still holding on to that fire that happened 300 years ago. In 325, he called together the Council of Nicaea. Then later, other people, because now this is the state-sponsored religion, they combine their worldly rituals to the festivals and feasts mentioned in Scripture, which is how we get like Easter eggs when we're supposed to be doing Passover, or we get Christmas trees and things like that when we're supposed to be celebrating a different festival. All those things got blended together. The reason why I have been heavy historical lately in my messages due to our need of understanding. When we don't know, we don't grow. What does it say in the book of the prophet Hosea? My people perish due to lack of knowledge. Some of us are perishing because we don't know. Some of us are perishing in silence because we've been numbed to the pain. You know, like when you go to the dentist and they have to put something to work on your teeth. They have to put something in your mouth to work on your teeth, right? What do they put on you so that you don't feel any pain? Put on some Novocaine. That's what it's called. Put Novocaine on there, because if they didn't put that on there and they started drilling in your mouth, you would bite them. You'd be fighting them like, bro, get out of my mouth. But when the Novocaine is applied, you are able to literally suffer in silence. You suffer in peace when the Novocaine is applied. Some of us have had spiritual Novocaine applied to us, and we are suffering in silence spiritually. And we just don't know. We just follow things. And this is the reason why somebody can come along with a TikTok video and just completely shatter our faith. Because we don't know. This is why people can subscribe to so many crackpot theories that people come up with. I keep seeing videos of this guy that talks about these emerald tablets. And that's what Jesus was really teaching from, was the emerald tablets. And because there was this guy that discovered them in Egypt, he translated them. No one else saw them, because then there was a fire and they burned. They don't exist anymore. But he had them and he translated them. But obviously this happened after the time of Christ, so this is where Jesus got it from. But because we don't know, somebody can get us off of our square so easily because we don't have a solid foundation. This is why people believe in like things like flat earth and all these other different things, because our school systems are terrible and we don't get taught properly. We get taught things that aren't real. So then when somebody comes to them, like, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because you explain that more than it was explained to me. We have people leaving the church, and not just because it's the quote-unquote end times, it's because they haven't been taught. If we were taught properly, if we had a foundation, we wouldn't be leaving. Because you think the disciples, like they were afraid, but they never questioned Jesus' existence. They never questioned if he was the Messiah after they saw the things that he did. They're like, this is it. Now I'm terrified, but this is it. And he told them, bad things are going to happen. So be prepared. What did he say? Satan wants to sift through you like wheat. But some of us have had spiritual Novocaine applied to us, and we are suffering in silence. We are perishing due to the lack of knowledge in silence. Amen. Thank you, Father, for adding a blessing to the reading of the word.